and welcome to the Biz Communications Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, every week bringing you recognized communication experts. And once we get their guidelines, their tips, and their strategies, you will be able to improve your sales, your management, your leadership, your teamwork, your motivation, and your profits. So we're delighted that you're joining us today. And again, I have a true expert with me, Dawn Echols, whose firm is Dawning Phoenix. Dawn is a licensed professional counselor. She's had a very interesting background: classical music instructor, insurance sales leader, marketing expert. She's done a little bit of everything, but for the past few years, she has excelled as a personal counselor. Dawn and I became acquainted a couple of years ago, and when I launched this show, I knew that she would be one of the first guests that I would bring along so that we could all benefit. Hello, Dawn. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the Biz Communication Show.
Hi, Bill. It's so good to be here. I'm so glad that you asked me.
Well, one of the things that I think all of us would like to know, looking at the different careers, the skills, the talents that you have, including, of course, your love of water skiing, what is it that prompted you to become a professional counselor?
I had a mentor, someone that had known me in my early stages of my career in sales, customer service, and marketing. And we reconnected after probably a little over a decade of me working in entrepreneurial roles and going back to school as well. And he challenged me to look at the fact that all the things that I had done and the things I had looked at doing were a really good fit for being a psychotherapist.
Among the functions that you provide for clients, I am sure, having had conversations with you previously, that you work with couples to try to improve their dialogue, their understanding of each other, resolve their differences. What do you find are some of the major problems that you need to help resolve as a personal counselor dealing with couples who are having strife?
That's a really good question, Bill. And I do have on my website, dawningphoenix.com, I do have links to one of yours on Listen to the Spouse in Your House from when we first met, because communication is where the breakdown often occurs. Yeah, obviously in psychotherapy, you've got things that drive those communications. So I'd like to address your question from that perspective. And often what happens by the time they get in a counseling office is there's defensiveness there. There's an expectation of what the partner is going to say. And so I would say that the answer to that question is three: defensiveness, the expectation of what the partner is going to say, and thinking of how they're going to answer in order to defend themselves to what they're expecting to hear before they actually hear it. Sometimes what we do, in fact, frequently, in addition to doing that and knowing that those are going to be the things that people most often bring to the couch, as we say, is that we talk to them about first learning to listen and dropping the defensiveness, and then actually being able to reflect back what they're hearing. And we do that through a series of exercises that help engage us into actually listening to what is being said rather than to what's going on in our head.
I remember so well along these lines, Dawn, when I was directing a seminar in Mississippi, my home state. I was working with a group of attorneys. And when we got to the topic of listening, which I always include instructions about listening skills, I always include that in my seminars, there was an attorney in the group who said, "Bill, I have counseled more than 500 couples going through divorce. And in every case, without exception, either one or both of them said of the other one, he or she does not listen to me."
That is so true, Bill. And when we don't feel heard, we don't feel valued. And so communication, that's the reason you hear people say communication is so important to couples or any kind of partnership, including business. It's important between managers and leaders and their subordinates. And active listening is one of the ways we do that. It's a term that you hear in music, and active listening requires you to do something other than just consume what you're hearing and just sit back and let it wash over you. With couples or even with anyone in conflict, it's about truly being able to kind of still all the voices and all the thoughts that we're having, all the noise in our heads, and actually concentrate on the person that's speaking to us and try to understand the content. And one of the things that comes to that is perspective. We layer our own perspective. A friend of mine always says perception is reality. But it's not, it's only our own reality. I love the analogy about the elephant, that the old analogy that you stand all the blind men around the elephant, and they'll each describe something different to you because they're only able to tell you what their perception of that elephant is. So the one standing under the trunk feels something completely different than the one standing at the foot or the one standing under the tail.
And as a matter of fact, there's a very catchy and memorable poem about that, and I've used that many times and refer back to it. It's very interesting to me that you said that one of our problems in listening, whether we're talking about couples or whether we're talking about business relationships or whether we're talking about friendships, one of our problems is that we are not trying to hear what the other person is saying. Instead, we are thinking about forming our answer. And I go back to what to me is one of the great chapters about listening, and that's in Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where chapter 5 has this terrific title, Seek First to Understand, and then to be understood. That would solve a lot of problems, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. It absolutely would. It requires that we come from a place of feeling like we've been heard and seen. And then I think that's where therapy can come in very valuably, especially in couples, because you have a third party in the room that can help translate what's being said, sometimes even negotiate, who can lay out the structure and rules of how each session, that hour or hour and a half that's reserved for that couple. And really what it's reserved for is for them to actually communicate. And the way they connect is through that communication and being able to have someone else say to them, well, this is let's reframe that. Let's rephrase that. Well, what do you think your partner's perception is when they say those things? But you start with some basics too, by just really having them reflect back. Okay, stop thinking about that. Just what you were talking about. Stop thinking about what you're going to say, and instead actually almost say back to them exactly word for word, and then you practice from there. And we do some more. It feels clunky. That's why a therapy session is the best place for it.
As I remember, this concept of repeating back to them what you think they said, I believe that might have been the contribution long ago of psychotherapist Carl Rogers. As I remember, there was a book of his, I think it might have been something like On Becoming a Person, maybe.
Yes, but you're absolutely right.
I believe maybe he was the pioneer of that type of talk.
He changed the face of psychology as it was known at that time. He's considered, his approaches and philosophies are considered the most important place for a psychotherapist to start. And if you can't have those foundational things that he talked about, the ability to listen and to understand rather than to be understood first, then really there's not much else, there's not anywhere to go. You have to have that ability. I'm so glad you referenced him. He's a foundational person in psychology. And then of course there's some great authors. You mentioned Stephen Covey. Some of my others are Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, when he talks about our mindset. And Melody Beattie, who is would tell you she's a layperson. She's considered a self-help guru and a journalist who's written many bestsellers. And what she does as an author is encourage you to understand yourself before you try to translate that into dealing with other people and how to do that. Often a lot of her writings help people communicate more effectively and lovingly while they're trying to understand themselves as well.
Do us a favor, spell Melody D's name. I'm not familiar with her.
Okay. She is a self-help writer. That's probably, I think her first book made it to the bestsellers list. I think of it as her first book as a therapist. It's one I recommend often. I think she's written a lot longer than that, but I believe her very first version of Codependent No More came out probably in the 80s. It's come out in there's a couple of different versions of it. She has some really good daily readers you can read to keep your thoughts on that self-reflection. And I believe for people who come into my office, I think that ability to self-reflect through those kind of writings or other writings that kind of the people we've talked about today, then those particular things can really help people be calmer when they're wanting to communicate and therefore really work at understanding what they're hearing. And her name is Melody, spelled like the music, Melody. And her last name is Beattie, Beattie. And I have links to some of her, well, not links, I have her name and titles on my website right under your stuff.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. One thing that we need to mention now, since this is the Biz Communication Show, is that the types of things that you are teaching couples about communicating, about listening, about knowing what the other person is thinking, about knowing what the other person is feeling, this translates as something very powerful for the business arena. For example, many people are terrifically unhappy in their professional life because their supervisor, they feel, rightly or wrongly, they feel their supervisor does not listen to them, might hear them audibly, but does not listen to them. So when we think about a business setting as well as a home setting, my gosh, you could improve every corporation of whatever size if people had a better grasp on listening skills.
Absolutely. And that's what leadership, it's important for leaders to set that tone. An employee who's struggling and working with a manager that they don't feel heard, that's a really difficult place for an employee to be. And one of the things they can do is perhaps try to set aside some of their dissatisfaction, at least temporarily, in an attempt to understand a manager they've got and hear what it is the manager that they find difficult is actually trying to say, try to understand the manager. What is it that this manager is trying to accomplish, even if they're not saying it very well to me? And how can I help that person feel understood so perhaps I can get a window in them hearing me the way I need them to as my manager? But really, it is so important, Bill, and you said a lot in a lot of your communication work about the importance of leadership skills, because the tone is set by that leader, and leaders must communicate effectively, and they have to do that by helping their people feel heard and understood. And so they do need to get their point across effectively. They need to communicate their expectations, but one of the things they can do is really help people feel recognized, heard, and understood. And I think you can get an employee, you can motivate them to do almost anything if you would simply start there as a leader. My best managers and people who inspired me to try things, to succeed, to achieve, to go past where I thought I could, to face my fear in performance, wherever I was, are the people who've actually heard and understood me and then challenged me in a way that was reachable for me or communicated effectively their belief that I could go past where I thought I could.
That is a terrific little testimonial right there as to the value of listening to the people who report to you. Now, a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned something that I would not want to close the program without discussing, and that is self-reflection. I, for many years, have been a huge fan of Shad Helmstetter and his book, What to Say When You Talk to Yourself. That's a book that I've listened to on audio. I've read it. I recognize every day, every moment, that what we are going to accomplish is very limited or it's unlimited according to what we have said to ourselves. What do you advise people about self-talk?
I'm so glad you brought that up. That is such a great book, What to Say When You Talk to Yourself. It is one of those standing classics that are so highly recommended. Anybody, obviously in leadership with sales, where they're trying to get people to perform better, we'll talk to them about that. But it's a great book for therapy too, because I believe that our self-talk reflects what our own beliefs are, our beliefs about ourselves, and our beliefs about the world around us, including the people in it. And sometimes those beliefs, in therapy, we call those illogical, negative, or irrational beliefs. And what we're trying to do is, I sometimes watch that, that's what the theories say, but I like to talk to people about how they might just be negative beliefs. I don't want them to get the wrong context from using the word irrational or illogical as though they're being irrational. What they've done is they've learned, all of us have done this, we've learned and built this belief through a series of experiences, but it came through those experiences that may not be fully informed. So I love to challenge people to listen to the noise in our head. What is it our thoughts are telling us? That self-talk is so important. We can understand the beliefs that we have through listening to our self-talk, and then we can change those beliefs. We can choose to consciously change and influence them and say, that's the experience I've had to this day. I learned that because of this experience or whatever. However, I'm a broader person today. I have a bigger world that I want to reach or I want to be part of. So I'm going to challenge that. And we can do that first by recognizing and examining the beliefs that come through our self-talk. And then secondly, by actually changing them effectively. Nathaniel Brandon, Pillars of Self-Esteem is one way to do that. Affirmations, which you can get through somebody like Melody Beattie, Louise Hay. Stephen Covey has some great work when you mentioned his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Self-talk is a habit. It runs in our head like a train on a circular track. So I like to challenge people, say, what is it you're believing? And I get them to do that by actually documenting it. We can do that through journaling. Sometimes it's just making a list over the course of a week. And then we like to challenge those and say, now, what is it we can say that are different? And Louise Hay has some a good little, it's sitting with your book back here on my desk, some affirmations on cards that are really beautiful. But I like to even help people develop their own. What is it they want to change? And that's what Shad Helmstutter's book does, is it encourages people to actually create their own new scripts for their self-talk.
I'm sure we've got a good number of sports fans who are viewing and listening today. Yesterday, late in the afternoon, I watched a professional golf tournament being played. The person who won the tournament, the guy who won it, came to the last green. He had an 8-foot putt to win the tournament. Now, what's important here is that prior to yesterday, he had played in 180 PGA tournaments. He had not won any of them. He finished a good number of high places. I think he had maybe several third places, but he had not won one. Now, as he stood over that 8-foot putt, which he did sink, he couldn't say to himself, I'm not a winner. He couldn't say to himself, I've missed a lot of these. No, he had to envision all the putts that he had sunk 8 feet or longer that got him to this position. And if he had told himself, I'm not going to make it, his stroke would have probably proved him right. So in every part of life, whether it's sports or whether it's business, now applying this to business, so many people, Dawn, since 1996 have had real challenges because we have to know technology now. All of us don't have to be experts, but we have to know it to some extent. I can still remember quite clearly when I was dragged kicking and screaming into learning technology. I tell one of my mentors, you're the guy who got me away from the number 2 pencil. Now, I could never have done that if I kept telling myself, you can't learn technology. I would have been right. You know, that old saying from Henry Ford, whether you tell yourself you can or you can't, you're right. This may be one of the most important concepts we're talking about today, whether it's for family, whether it's for business relationships, whether it's for social relationships, athletics, finance, whatever you do, right?
Yes, because when we communicate, we're communicating a lot about ourselves too. Just like they say, the eyes are the window to the soul. Sometimes what we're saying is a window to who we are and what we believe. So we can listen to what we're saying, but we also need to listen to what we're thinking. And you're absolutely correct. There's a lot of mind-body connection between what you believe and what you're saying to yourself, and then how that affects your actual physical condition or physical performance. Athletes all know this. I had a music professor tell me that he had read The Inner Game of Tennis and applied that to his piano performance. He was a tennis player and a golf player as well. And he said, what's going on in your head affects what's happening on the keys. And so it applies no matter what we're doing. And the ability to communicate in some ways, more than 70% of that or more is done through nonverbals that include our tone of voice, which is, not just the words we speak. And so, sorry, I got inspired by that. I thought of so many different things that applies to, Bill. And then when we speak to our teenagers and our children, the way we speak to them is how they learn to see the world. And so you want to communicate to them recognizing they're in a different place. We want to communicate with other people by first listening and hearing what they say, whether it's our children, our coworkers, our neighbors. Neighbor conflicts can be resolved if we simply don't start with that anticipation or that belief that says, this is not going to go well, but instead, just like this golf player yesterday. And I love what you pointed out about all the putts that he had sunk, because practice, the minute you started talking about that he had not ever won until yesterday, but he had placed, and then my first thought was, but I bet he sunk a lot in practice. And we can do that through listening to our self-talk. That's almost a way of practicing for communicating in the outside world, is think about how we're communicating with ourselves, and then work to achieve a positive change through that, and get rid of self-limiting beliefs and change the way we talk to ourselves.
Don, this has been a tremendously helpful conversation. I will close by asking for your contact information in a few seconds. I'm reminded of something, a quip I heard some time back, where one guy supposedly said to another one, "Have you read Norman Vincent Peale's book, The Power of Positive Thinking?" And the guy responded, "No, it wouldn't do me any good." And it won't do you any good unless you pay attention. And Don, it has been great paying attention to the expertise that you have shared with us today. So I know our viewers and listeners will want to know how to get in touch with you. Please give us the information that you want to share on that.
Okay, thank you, Bill. The name of my practice is Dawning Phoenix. It's like the rising mythical bird that comes out of ashes for success and victory. We're located in Gainesville. I am a licensed professional counselor, psychotherapist. I'm trained as a mediator. Our telephone number is 678-965-9591. Again, that telephone number is 678-965-9591. Or alternatively, they might want to check out our website at dawningphoenix.com. You can use the contact us and send us an email. And Dawning Phoenix is spelled DAWNINGPHOENIX.com.
Don, there are quite a few Gainesvilles around, such as some people get us mistaken for Florida. So I will underscore that we're talking about Gainesville, Georgia. That's where I operate from and where you do as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Don Echols, for being with us. We appreciate it so much. And next time you're our guest, and there will be a next time, we're going to talk about something that many parents would be vitally interested in, and that is, how can you improve communication with teenage children? My gosh.
Absolutely.
There are plenty of people who will welcome that, as we have welcomed your advice today. Thanks again, Don, for being with us. Thanks so much to all of you who have joined us. I invite you to be with us next week on the Biz Communication Show. I'm the Biz Communication guy, Bill Lampton, and as Dawn has given her contact information, I'm happy to share mine. just go to my website, biz, that's B-I-Z, bizcommunicationguy.com. You'll find a description of my services there and my contact information as well. Thank you once more, and happy and constructive communication to each and every one of you.